Only defensive programs using lethal germs to develop vaccines, like the one Bruce Ivans was working on at Fort Detrick, were allowed. Many experts agreed. The anthrax in the 2001 letter attacks was the most sophisticated they had ever seen. But some dispute how a single scientist working alone could refine this level of anthrax without support. Richard Spurzel, Fort Detrick's former deputy commander, was among them.
I'm fully convinced, as are other experts, not alone by any chance, that Dr. Ivans could not have done this with the equipment that he had. The material that was in the Dashon Leahy letter, according to FBI releases, was 1.5 to 3 microns in particle size. This was super sophisticated. To get 1.5 to 3 microns mass median diameter is phenomenal. I contend that that kind of powder could not be made at Fort Detrick because they don't have the equipment necessary to get down to that particle size with that kind of refinement.
The list of suspect labs expanded beyond the United States when early in their investigation, officials released a key piece of information.
Can you tell us which strain it is, sir? And does the fact that these are a little bit...
AIM strain.
The AIM strain. And can you tell us...
The AIM strain is an extremely deadly variety of anthrax developed by the U.S. military for its vaccine work. It emerged that the AIM strain had been shared with labs in other countries.
So I began to look who had the means of and the availability of the Ames strain abroad, which labs, were there any labs that could have done this? You couldn't limit this to America and exclude every place else because it was available in England, in Canada, in many foreign countries.
Stephen Dresch was asking similar questions. He had been a Republican legislator in Michigan, now dedicated to exposing what he called the bioweapons mafia. And he was making an astounding claim that if anyone could provide a window into the anthrax letter attacks, it was a leading scientist at Britain's top military lab, Porton Down. Porton Down had received the AIM strain from Fort Detrick.
The first time that I heard of Dr. David Kelly was soon after 9/11. The anthrax letters had just hit the U.S. While public investigations seemed to sputter, I had begun to penetrate what I have come to call the international bioweapons mafia. If anyone knew the secrets of the international bioweapons mafia, it was David Kelly. Then, he too turned up dead in the woods.
David Kelly took a walk in the woods near his home, slit his wrist, and killed himself.
Kelly had also been a top UN weapons inspector in Iraq.
At the root of it all is whether Dr. David Kelly was the source of stories that the British government had exaggerated intelligence reports in order to draw the country more easily into war.
Dresch was on his way to England to investigate David Kelly's death for himself, and Cohn decided to join him. Investigating the death of military microbiologist David Kelly was just the beginning of our journey with Private Eye Dresch. What might Kelly's death illuminate about the secret world of anthrax and its international connections?
The Ministry of Defence moved with great speed this afternoon, confirming that there will be an inquiry led by one of Britain's most senior judges.
Lord Hutton heard 74 witnesses in just 22 days, none of them under oath. Many considered Hutton's report clearing the British government of wrongdoing a whitewash. The official ruling of suicide was challenged by a group of medical experts who called for the reopening of a coroner's inquest. Dresch and Cohen flew to London the day it was scheduled to take place. Despite inconsistencies in the forensic evidence, the court, in less than 10 minutes, announced there would be no further investigation.
I didn't believe for one moment that he took his own life.
Kelly, I mean, he would not take the type of knife he took if he was seriously going to commit suicide.
It's a cover-up of a cover-up, and of course they get to the point they just can't stop because he's opening the can of worms.
We sought out John Skerr, Britain's leading vascular surgeon. Skerr questioned how Kelly could have died from a self-inflicted pocket knife wound.
Cutting the wrist is usually something that's done by often young people, girls, some men. It's a sort of cry for help. It's not generally regarded as a reliable way of committing suicide. In this case, as I understand it, and certainly the information I've been given, it would have been necessary to use the knife really the wrong way round and go up. So it's an unusual way of trying to cut your wrist to start with.
Louise Holmes was the first to discover Kelly's body.
Could you describe where the body was?
Yeah, the body was against a tree with the head and the shoulders just slumped back a little bit on the tree.
But you would not say he was lying on the ground?
No, he was. The way that I described how he was the way that I described it in court, with his head and his shoulders against the base of the tree and the rest of his body on the floor.
The police report described the body as laying flat on the ground. Who might have moved Kelly, and why? One British member of Parliament concluded that the Hutton inquiry had been a cover-up. By that time, Dresch was dying of cancer, and Cohen was back in London on his own.
I am convinced beyond reasonable doubt, more than that, in fact, that David Kelly was murdered.
Norman Baker, a long-standing member of the House of Commons, had spent a year investigating Kelly's death.
There were no fingerprints on the knife which David Kelly allegedly used to kill himself, which, to my mind, only reinforced my view that it was extremely difficult to conclude that he had committed a suicide.
Who may have wanted David Kelly dead, and why? Gordon Thomas, an author who writes about the world of secret intelligence, had met David Kelly a few months before his death.
David Kelly was a major part of the biological warfare intelligence world. He knew more than perhaps anybody I know, and perhaps anybody knew. And he was brilliant. That's why he was always consulted by other intelligence services. If they got into a mess, CIA, Canadian intelligence, they'd say, we better ask Dr. Kelly what he thinks. He had explored with 2 or 3 writers, of which I'm happy to include myself, the possibility he could write a book about his life. And I said to him at the time, you know, David, you signed the Official Secrets Act. He said, I know. And yes, I'll need somebody else to write it with the information I provide. I said, but you know, you won't get away with it, David.
Intrigued by Thomas's account, Cohen decided to look into Kelly's place of work, Porton Down, the UK's secret biological and chemical weapons complex. Porton Down had received the AIM strain from Fort Detrick in the 80s.
Look at this. Prohibited. Porton Down.
David Kelly had been head of microbiology at Porton Down. At the time of his death, Porton Down was the target of a major police investigation. Codenamed Operation Antler, it looked into deaths and injuries to British soldiers caused by secret experiments conducted between 1939